Hello and welcome to 24 Lives Per Second, Guernsey's only dedicated film and cinema podcast. My name is Tyson, Winter Tyson, licensed to drive and ride motorbikes up to 125cc. With me is 00 negative Russell Kellaway.
Hello, licensed to drive category C vehicles up to 7.5 tonnes. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's quite impressive.
I know, it's good, isn't it?
There's no Claire Mockett this week. She has decided to take part in a real-life recreation of The Day After Tomorrow. She's on holiday in New York and I hope she's well. In this episode, we'll be looking at the return of James Bond in Skyfall and the twisted time travel of Rian Johnson's Looper, both currently playing at the Mallard. But we've also been trying out Curzon on Demand's online service that allows you to stream art house movies at the same time as their cinema release. Under the microscope this week are Holy Motors and Berberian Sound Studio. But first up, it's Skyfall.
It's gone.
You both know what's at stake here.
There isn't much road left.
Take the bloody shot. What do you say about a man like that?
3 months ago, you lost the drive containing the identity of every agent embedded in terrorist organizations across the globe.
007 reporting for duty.
Where the hell have you been?
Enjoying death.
I only have one question. Why not stay dead? There's no shame in saying you've lost a step.
They weren't targeting her. They wanted her to see it.
Welcome to the new MI6.
I'm your quartermaster. You must be joking.
Author PPKS 9mm short. It's been coded to your palm print, so only you can fire it. Less of a random killing machine, more of a personal statement.
Q.
007.
I want to meet your employer.
How much do you know about fear?
All there is.
Not like this. Not like him.
Just look at you, chasing spies. England, MI6. She sent you after me knowing you're not ready, knowing you would likely die. Mommy was very bad. The two survivors, this is what she made us.
Everybody needs a hobby.
So what's yours?
Resurrection.
So James Bond is back and he finds himself caught up in a plot too. Well, does it really matter? More importantly, we've got Javier Bardem, Ben Whishaw, Naomi Harris, Ralph Fiennes, Rory Kinnear, Albert Finney and of course Judi Dench and Daniel Craig. We've also got cinematographer Roger Deakins and director Sam Mendes. So, with all this star wattage, does Skyfall deliver? Russ, what's your take on this?
Listing that off, it's impressive, isn't it?
It's very
It's
impressive.
really good. Like even
Yeah.
you think from the roles down to Rory Kinnear as well, who's great in it, and kind of Naomi Harris and all those kind of stuff. It's fleshed out with some real quality.
I mean,
kind
Rory
of people in
Kinnear
there.
plays like civil servant
Yeah.
essentially, and I mean he's someone. If there's something on telly and I see Rory Kinnear in an advert, right, taping that.
Yeah, because he's great. No, really good. No, it's exciting. I think that gives an indication of where I'm going with it. I did really enjoy it.
Right. Okay.
I went to the cinema hoping to enjoy it. I'm a fan of Daniel Craig and kind of the last two. I mean, Quantum of Solace was a bit of nothing. There wasn't much there, but it was fun. I haven't got a problem with it. I still thought the character kind of worked and was quite good. But Casino Royale, when they reinvented that, a couple of years ago now, I thought that was quite a brilliant Bond and kind of a great relaunch of it, in the kind of Jason Bourne era that we're in now, and kind of set it back on quite a nice track. And this is almost the culmination of that kind of I think. For me, what I kind of found as soon as I'd finished watching it was there'd been so much talk of how after Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace, this Bond film was kind of supposed to be a return to a more traditional Bond, and how they were saying that because it's the 25th.
But they say it every time, don't
they?
they?
Well, they seem to be because it's the 50th anniversary, isn't it? And they were kind of 25th Bond film. I can't remember. Yeah, 25th. And so they were talking about that. But I kind of came out of it, and all I could think was, I didn't quite agree with that. I thought it was actually a really different Bond film, and it was because it did have it had a few more lighter moments than the previous two. There are a couple of cheeky one-liners in there, and there are definitely a few more. A few more over-the-top set pieces. One involving Komodo dragons is kind of definitely a bit of a blast from the past, of kind of maybe more of a Roger Moore kind of era Bond. But like I say, I just didn't think it was more traditional, and I was happy it wasn't. I thought it went in some different ways. What the biggest way was, I thought. I mean, we're trying very hard not to give away any spoilers, in terms of this. But even if we mention certain things, it's difficult. So if you don't want to know anything, then you might just want to tread very carefully. Yeah, skip to something else. But at the end, it's so stripped back. I mean, this film becomes it's almost it's not Bond taking down a criminal in his lair or doing some crazy stuff with some massive gadgets and amazing cars. It's right down to bare bones of kind of man on man in a desolate environment, and kind of it was almost, as soon as it becomes almost a siege film, and we've had these films this year like The Raid and like Judge Dredd and which have been these kind of people holed up in one location and kind of fighting for their lives. And it was interesting that this kind of came along at the end of that seeming kind of run of films as well, which was quite interesting. What I'd almost argue that Craig's Bond in this film plays third wheel to Judi Dench and Javier Bardem. I think that his story is almost not as pushed to the forefront as who drives the narrative forward. He's almost a bit of a passenger in it, and I don't think that's not a bad thing. I just kind of found that almost was interesting, because you didn't kind of maybe get as much of him as you normally would, and therefore it fleshed out some of the characters around him a bit more. And and I think obviously you can look at Javier Bardem's villain of Silver, and I think he's a great character. He's really interesting. He's just the whole interesting dynamic he has with Bond. There's a big scene that people have been talking about in terms of there's a certain sexual chemistry there, but I think it was more of him just being playful in a kind of in an evil way, and kind of seeing if he can push some buttons and get a response, and just kind of to show, because I don't think at any point he kind of seemed to come across as crazy. I just think he was someone who was very much out for revenge and just kind of wanted, knew that kind of path that he wanted to go on. So that was nice. My main criticism, and to be honest, one of my only criticisms is that it could have been 20 minutes shorter. It's 2 hours and 20 minutes long, and it's the lingering camera shots that could have been cut down on. It is beautifully shot by Roger Deakins. I think it's the best looking Bond film that I've ever seen. And so that's great. They're good shots to watch, but there were certainly times when I was like, okay, we don't need another wide shot or another shot of the boat or something like that. We could really be cutting this down.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this sort of at the night, didn't we? And we said it's this idea that they're showing you the places that paid for it. So we get some lovely shots of like Shanghai and so on. And they're really doing that whole kind of, they really went for the whole globe-trotting thing. Because at the start of the film, there's some business on the rooftops of Istanbul, which featured very heavily in Taken 2 and Clive Owen movie, The International, except what this essentially took what Taken 2 and International did with those rooftops, and then just went, and motorbikes, and all before sort of that's the opening, that's the sort of pre-credits end of The Last Adventure. And I know what you mean about, I mean, one of the things that struck me about it was just how good looking some of the film was. There are certain scenes, right, okay, we're going to chat about some spoilers, so if you don't want to hear it, skip ahead to Looper, which will probably be just as hard to explain without really talking about. But there's a fight where there's a fight in a skyscraper in this film, in which it's backlit with neon. So you've got two silhouettes occasionally being lit up by the occasional discharge of a gun, and it looks fantastic.
It is beautiful.
It looks almost like something from a sort of a Hollywood, like an old school musical, and then. Later on, there's some big business with explosions, and you've got these shots of almost like hellish looking the red moors of Scotland, and that looks like something out of There Will Be Blood.
Yeah, it was something. Stunning.
It's that kind of imagery, and I mean, what I really enjoyed about this film was it started off as Bond. It almost started off as Mission Impossible, that kind of extra step above that kind of, because I think our criticism of Mission Impossible 4 was the fact that Ethan Hawke appears to be invincible Superman. And this Bond film starts in that way, and then as the film goes on, it strips everything down. The plot becomes less complicated. what's going on. It starts off with a very complicated plot, and there's kind of explosions and bombs and terrorism and computer hacking, and we end up with revenge. We end up in an old stone building, and it literally goes from diggers being used as weapons and the high-tech gadgetry, all those kind of bits and pieces, and by the end we're scrabbling around in an old house.
We're manufacturing nail bombs out of light bulbs. Yeah,
and I thought it was really smart, and what I quite liked about it is this is what I kind of hoped. When there was all this talk of Bond was going to be reinvented, it's grittier, it's new Bond, and it was the same sort of stuff. It was the same kind of, they had the casinos and all that kind of those bits and pieces. And Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace never really got away from that. Whereas in this film, you start off with the casinos, and there's a ridiculous scene where he's going across to a casino in, I think it's in Shanghai. or something.
Yeah.
And he's
Macau.
He's stood on a
boat.
like a raft, a little kind of junk boat, and he's being ferried across to the entrance.
The sheer logistics of it, just
Yeah,
ludicrous.
Exactly,
Yeah,
it's completely impractical. And like I said, when he gets in there's the kimono dragons, and there's all these kind of bits and pieces. And then at the end, we're in a farmhouse. It's straw dogs almost.
Yes, exactly.
And I love that. I absolutely love the fact that they, and what the film does is essentially build up to what could be a really interesting next film, because they've stripped everything down. The way the story works in this, they've set up where the series is going next. And I mean, there's something to be said if you want to look at it in a kind of some kind of critical framework. The film essentially does say, "Bitches be crazy, and women know your limits," and it turns Bond back into a more masculine kind of the men are in charge kind of film, literally. In almost every way, even to the point where there's one character who effectively goes from I'm every bit as good as you to Pip, I'm a secretary. Very true. I'm not saying that's a bad. I'm not criticising the film for that in the kind of it should be ashamed of itself. It should be more feminist way. But I just found it a very interesting. It's a reassertion of Bond as kind of a very masculine character. After a few years when they've been, Bonds in the last few years have been a bit kind of. They've been a bit more in touch with their feminine side. They've been a bit more kind of this kind of new man Bond. I think Timothy Dalton, it was kind of forced upon him because of AIDS, essentially. No, he doesn't have AIDS, but suddenly people having sex and smoking and kind of drinking their way through 200 women isn't quite as good. But I mean, I just love this film, and there's a really interesting thing with Javier Bardem's bad guy Silver as well, because he's essentially playing him as James Gumb. Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs. It's a really odd performance, isn't it?
It's very odd. It is very odd, and I think they played on it. The way he's introduced is very odd. There's a single shot that he walks through, which is very different, and a very stylistic kind of choice to do. And his whole thing's off kilter. We all know that as a Bond villain, you're supposed to have some kind of defect, and you watch him and you think, there's no kind of. He looks a bit effeminate slightly, but and then later on in the film, it is revealed that he does have quite a serious, physical defect that's very impressively kind of brought out. I thought he was very good, and he was very chilling. In the same way in his No Country for Old Men, he definitely was able to pull on that.
And I liked it because the character didn't. Being that the character had this kind of this effeminate side, I'd sort of class as your Hollywood kind of creepy, sinister gay.
Definitely.
Like a Hollyoaks character with a mustache, essentially. But he was very much a man of within that. Yes. He was a man of action, which a lot of the major Bond villains aren't until right at the end. But he was still a guy. He was in there whenever they were causing mayhem. He was there. He was doing it.
There was never a sense of it's his henchman that's going to get you. It was always a sense of they might get him in the building and then he'll get you afterwards. I mean, one thing I read that is potentially quite an exciting thing is I think it's quite widely known that Daniel Craig signed on for 2 more, and I think they've got the people scripting them as a potential two-parter. So whether they're doing it as a build-up to him kind of finishing, and there might be quite a big, event kind of driven couple of movies coming up, which might be quite interesting. I would be happy to see Sam Mendes back directing it. I thought he did a very good job.
I thought it was brilliant.
Considering I think he had everything to lose by taking it. He's a director that's not known for action. He's a theatre director predominantly, in terms of where his craft lies, and that's what he's often brought into his film directing. I think he did an amazing job, and like we said, as much as Roger Deakins was there to compose the shots, he still had to, be there and pick them and tell people what to do with it. So a lot of credit to him. And as we are, you're in a position where you're looking forward to the next one, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like Bond films generally. I mean, I the type of films I used to really enjoy them, then having sort of revisited them lately, I get about half an hour and think I just can't watch this. This just makes no sense in any kind of way. And even the older ones that are more like science fiction films, I think my favourite one's probably something like From Russia with Love, which is quite a straightforward film in many ways. But no, I was really surprised and really happy to enjoy this film quite a lot. And next up is Rian Johnson's Looper, following on from what I think is kind of universally acknowledged to be quite a brilliant movie, Brick, which also starred Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Looper tells the story of, well, I haven't seen it and I've been avoiding it. I'm hoping to see it next week. So what's going on?
Okay, so Looper, it's set in, it's mainly set in 2040, and the character of Joe, who's played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, is employed as a looper, who is a hitman who kind of executes victims sent back from 30 years in the future, basically. And time travel's been invented and is controlled by organised crime in that future. When his older self, played by Bruce Willis, turns up as a target, he fails to carry out the hit, and both versions go on the run and try to affect their futures separately. So it's not like they team up. They're very much their own kind of men, and they're trying to do things for themselves. And all this ends up involving a single mother called Sarah, played by Emily Blunt, who owns a farm where the younger Joe, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, hides out from a vengeance-seeking gang, along with her child called Sid, who's telekinetic, which is you may not have known was involved in the film, which I didn't either when I went to see it. Something that was revealed later on. I was extremely excited to see this film. Having loved Johnson's previous films, like you mentioned, Brick, and I mean to a lesser extent, The Brothers Bloom. This is all right film, but Brick was kind of his announcement to the world stage, which is an amazing kind of piece of cinema. And kind of, I wouldn't say I came away disappointed. It's strange. There was definitely a period. It's a 2-hour film, and there was definitely a period around halfway through when it just sagged for me, and I was sat there and I was thinking, wow, we're only an hour into this thing, and I was quite surprised that it really kind of dropped it. And I think it was around the time when it's really trying to get a hold of where it's going, but not reveal too much to you at the same time, and it just slows down a touch. And I mean, then it kicks off, and the last kind of 40 minutes is brilliant, and the finale for me was brilliant. I mean, it ends the way I love films to end, and for me, it really kind of tied itself up in not in a bow and plot wise, but for me, it worked really nicely, and I like that quite a lot. What Johnson does do really well is, I think he takes those established genres, and such as film noir for Brick, and to a lesser futuristic sci-fi for kind of this film, and he's able to play with the format to give you something new, and that's what is so rare, I think. In a lot of the films we go and see, if it's just a film and you've seen it 100 times, and it might still be enjoyable, but it's nothing new, it's nothing really been thought out, and it's the films that they put that extra effort into, it's the details that kind of come across. He does it in Looper he gives us this slightly kind of dirty future vision where, because you're only talking in theory, 30 years in the future, and so you've got cars that are still cars, but they've been modified, but like shoddily, to kind of suit what's going on. So whether they've had some new, it's never explained, whether they've had some new fuel that's come in, and instead of just everyone's getting new cars, they're just going to stick some pipes on the outside, because there's quite a rich poor divide. It's quite Depression era kind of side for the poor, and then obviously there's a certain level of wealth there for the rich, and you've got those cars living alongside hover bikes, which people have if they've got the money as well. So it's a really strange and interesting juxtaposition that comes in, which makes it a very interesting kind of movie to watch and get a handle on. And even some of the design, especially in the past version, the kind of the now with Joseph Gordon-Levitt, it's almost steampunk wise, some of the weaponry. So it's a really interesting kind of fusion of different designs to kind of to get your head round, but it works really well. He's got a reason for everything. He's obviously clearly been thought out, which I really liked. The acting throughout is superb. There's been a lot made about the prosthetics that they put on Joseph Gordon-Levitt to make him look like a younger Bruce Willis, and they are amazing. They are quite uncanny, and you sit there, and I sat there, and he does that really difficult job of doing an impression of Bruce Willis without doing an impression of Bruce Willis. It's the looks and the tics, and it's a very good mimic.
And the prosthetics don't drown out the performance.
No, not at all. I never felt he was fighting against it, and I never felt he was showing a lack of emotion because he had stuff on his face. Because in theory, I think it's just a nose and a chin, maybe a lower face prosthetic, that he's got on. But for me, it just really worked. It helped to kind of, match them together, and because they don't look alike at all. And normally you wouldn't think about it, and normally I don't think anyone would do anything about it. They just leave it, and you'd accept it was so. But it did add an extra layer of kind of interest and a slight off-kilterness to it.
Right,
and so, like I say, once again, it was a really interesting design choice. And like I say, for me, it worked. It was darker than I thought it was going to be. It's got some really dark elements, and it was because of those dark elements that my wife hated it. She had a really strong reaction to it. I can't talk about it without spoiling it, but some things, something happens in this film that most directors would not do. It just wouldn't happen. They would shy away from it. I could give you a clue. Probably one of the only directors that I can think who's ever done it is John Carpenter. And so potentially, you might think what I'm talking about, and it's a very interesting thing to do, and it's so like I was okay, that's interesting, and it's portrayed by a character you're supposed to kind of not really understand whether you're liking them or not, and so that can turn the tide on it or not. I went with it and kind of enjoyed it. My wife took an adverse reaction to it and didn't think it was needed, and that was kind of the way it was. So there are some virtuoso sequences in it. There's a sequence in it where it almost does a excuse the phrase. It almost does a sliding doors and shows you something that would have happened if someone had made another decision, and it goes off and shows you 20 years of the future in kind of a montage. It's brilliantly done and really stylistically brilliant, and kind of just an excellent piece of filmmaking, and covered a lot of exposition very quickly, and saved you kind of time on that, which was great. So overall, it wasn't a perfect film. I didn't love it as much as I wanted to. I really enjoyed it, and it almost, for me, I came out almost thinking of putting it in kind of the same bracket as Prometheus for me, which is my kind of personal view of Prometheus was it's big, intelligent sci-fi striving for something more, and because of that, it's got faults, and those faults are why a lot of people didn't like it. I would rather they stretched for it and had faults as opposed to making something really simple that tied up nicely at the end and off it went, and that was it. So that's where I came from it, and after all of that, I still want to see it again, and that's often my barometer of whether I did really like something or not. If I come out of the cinema and go, it was alright, but I wouldn't see it again, I would definitely go and see this again, and I'd like to sit down and watch it and unpick it a bit more. And I think that's something that Rian Johnson, he does. He makes films that no one else is making at the moment, and they're different. And because they're different, they're just really interesting to watch. And I think it's something he should be applauded for. So I think you've got at least a week left to go and watch it at the Mallard. So if it's still out, you've got to go and catch it.
Because like Prometheus, is it one of those films you just want people to see it so you can find out what they think of it?
Yeah, it is.
That's what really got me about Prometheus.
Yeah, because I was really interested. Like I say, simply because of
I don't know if you like it, but you got to go and see it.
Simply because of one facet of it, my wife didn't like it, and I know obviously it did get rave reviews from all the big, broadsheets, and a lot of the film magazines said how amazing it was, and there are bits of it that you're gonna have to go with. It's not at times you could go, oh really, you're going there, and if you don't choose to go with it, you're potentially going to think it's rubbish. It's got some really interesting plot points to it, but like I said, that I like that. It's nice. It takes some risks, and that's why it's good. I would definitely recommend it.
Okay, and now we're moving on to a couple of art house films. Recently, probably through the Komodo Mayo podcast, become aware that Curzon cinemas offer an on-demand service whereby they'll stream online films that are currently showing in their cinemas. So you'll get to see kind of art house releases that you wouldn't otherwise see, day and date for when they're released in the cinema. The cost it's £10 for a new release, which I'm presuming is probably quite close to their ticket price. We've checked out a couple of films. I haven't had a chance to look at Berberian Sound Studio yet, Although I've done that annoying thing where you pay for it and then it expires. But I'm very interested in this, starring Toby Jones as a sound man who goes out to Italy to work on what turns out to be a horror film, and things aren't quite what they seem.
Yeah.
What's your take on it?
Do you know what? This has been a really good couple of weeks for films that we've had to watch, because I think almost everything we're talking about today is a great film. Really
Brilliant.
Good, really interesting. So Berberian Sound Studio, it's very much a love letter to cinema sound production. Specifically, from I think it's probably set around the late 70s, early 80s, Italian kind of giallo horrors kind of coming in, and the film itself that they're making is called The Equestrian Vortex, which doesn't really mean much, but all you see of the film is the credit sequence, and and it's all kind of, high contrast graphics of red and black and crosses and horses, which is strange. But yeah, so it's this love letter to this, and in a really clever and postmodern way, it manages to show you how the fear and the scares of the time were created on film, while filling you with the same dread you're supposed to feel while watching it. So it's almost pulling back the curtain, but then closing it again in the same film, which was really interesting. It's not the scariest film of all time. I don't even know if I'd call it a horror film. It's more of a kind of it's not even a thriller, because it's quite sedate, really.
Right, okay.
Because
is it more of an atmosphere piece?
For sure, it's very much a mood kind of piece to it. From what Toby Jones does a fantastic job of doing is he pulls the audience in really well, because he does what he does very well is this quiet, well-mannered, kind of slightly downtrodden character, and the journey he goes on is he starts off, like I say, he's come to Italy and he's by himself, he's away from his wife. And what starts off as the simple frustration of not speaking the language, and all he really wants is to get his travel expenses back because he hasn't got any money. And then kind of sinister things start happening. No one's really taking any notice of him. They just want him to do the work. And then he starts getting slightly more involved than he'd like, and he starts having very strange dreams. And it all kind of comes in very close, and it all comes to a head. Now, this is another film. Like I say, we'll talk about Holy Motors after this, and these two I have quite similar reactions to. I cannot profess to fully understand to what is going on in Berberian Sound Studio. It ends up, and in a way, both of them have Lynchian aspects to them, for sure. But that didn't stop my enjoyment of it at all. I just sat there and I went with it, and certainly the last 10-15 minutes, it goes into some pretty crazy places, and it's up to you to decide, are these imagined places? Is this really happening? Is it a dream? Kind of crazy things like that. And none of it's really either told for sure, it's just inferred, or it's not inferred, and it kind of just goes on. So it's very interesting, but it's still great. It's shot, its style is so of the period that it's supposed to be depicting, that it's a really beautiful film.
Right,
and it's a really economical film in how it's almost single location. The only certainly the only place you see is the studio, as in like the whole studio that he's working in, from reception to corridors, but even to the sound studio he's working in, it very rarely deviates from there. It's either that or a bedroom that you actually find out is off the set kind of later, so he's there all the time. The supporting cast are great. They're all Italian actors who fob him off and talk about him behind his back, and all that just serves to add to the kind of claustrophobia that he feels, and because he is an expert. They were supposed to have brought him in to do this, and so there's always that sense of why are they doing this to me? I'm supposed to be the person they're supposed to be listening to, and yet they're not. And being Italian, there's some womanizing going on, and is that going a bit deeper than it should be? And so it's got so many questions, this film, to kind of really understand. But I would thoroughly recommend it, and it's a very interesting film. And certainly if you like sound production, if you're interested at all at that, it's almost like a documentary on how they created a lot of the old sounds. There's lots of melons being chopped and things being squashed into the ground and things like that. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was very good.
Is it a film for filmy people, or is if you're sort of a more generalist film watcher, would you still enjoy it, or is it one for us nerds?
It's funny. It's because I'm not a big David Lynch fan.
Right,
I haven't seen a lot of his work. I've seen Mulholland Drive, and I've seen a few other bits and pieces. And I would suggest, from what I know of him, if you like that kind of cinema, you will like this. Would my wife enjoy it? I would say no. It could be quite slow, but it's only about 90 minutes, so it can afford to take its time a little bit. It's not a 2.5 hour art house film, and it's got a plot that moves along. It's just got that essence of, it's got that same essence of maybe like, I Don't Look Now or Rosemary's Baby, that certain sense of, just an impending, something's not right. That's what you get from it. Something's not right with where he is. Whether there is something not right or whether it's all up there, you're kind of left to make your own decision on it. But great performance by him, great direction by Peter Strickland, the director who made it, and like I said, yeah, just a really cracking little film.
Brilliant. Okay, now it's Holy Motors. How does one explain what Holy Motors is? On the surface, you have a gentleman called Mr. Oscar, who is being driven around in a limousine and inhabits various characters for different scenes. Sometimes he's a red-headed monster emerging from the sewers to wreak havoc. Other times he's doing motion capture. If you had to say to someone what is Holy Motors, what's it about? If you had to sell it to someone to watch.
Selling it's different. I reckon I can tell you what it's roughly about. Like you said, Mr. Oscar gets picked up from his home by a stretch limo. Yeah. He's then driven around Paris for a day, performing different roles, seemingly for a camera crew that are either not there or hiding in the shadows. Yeah. That's the best I could come up with in terms of what it is. What I will say is that I was surprised at how much I enjoyed this film.
Right, okay.
Because I don't know any of Leo Carax, who is the director of its previous work. I really struggled, but I loved it. I really loved it, and I think the reason it gets away with it is that by having, I say, you have this main character who plays throughout the course of the film, I think 6 or 7 different parts.
And it's a performance, isn't it? My word.
Well, that's what I mean. And so the best thing is, what it ends up turning into is it's a bit of a portmanteau film, because if you don't like where it's going, in 10 minutes' time he's going to be doing something else, and so it gives you that just room to breathe. So if you don't like it, you might not only like it for 10 minutes, and then you can just pick up something else and kind of move on with it. And like you said, I think what was amazing was his performance. Like his transformations, he gets around Paris in his limo, which kind of doubles as a theatrical dressing room.
Yeah.
And obviously he's got everything in there. It's a bit of a Pandora's box, isn't it?
He can it's like TARDIS almost, isn't it?
Because he just gets given these assignments and he seems to be able to pick anything out. And just the fact that each of the turns is different. Some of them are very, very downtrodden and very sad and very poignant, or they're hilariously funny and really dark, or just totally strange, but they shift within it. There's a scene where he's a dying man, and there's a very poignant scene with his daughter, and then it finishes and off they go and have a little chat about other stuff, and it's quite a funny, and it ends on one of the strangest moments I've seen in recent years, twice actually, when it ends, both with the character of Monsieur Oscar, who finishes, and then where it goes after that, which is totally crazy, kind of totally mad. But like I say, I think the reason I liked it was because it was all those things. It's moving, it's funny, it's disgusting, it's poignant, it's totally bonkers, all within 2 hours. And like I say, I still don't really know what it was all about. I can't. You can sit here and talk about how it's about the artifice of life and how it's about being controlled by other people and other things like that. But all I do know is that after 2 hours of it, it left me with a smile on my face.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I enjoyed every minute of it. The touching bits were touching, the funny bits were funny, the monstrous bits were just spectacular, to be honest. And what I really liked about it was it's literally more than the sum of its parts. It's not just a string of disconnected scenes, and not just in the way that it's the same actor playing all of these roles, and you watch him apply the makeup and take the makeup off and get into character and all this stuff. But it's actually a whole. It works as a whole piece, and I don't think the individual bits would be enjoyable.
No, not if you took them
stranded by themselves. And it's kind of, I mean, what I took from it was the idea of, first of all, this idea of film as a medium only being as good as what you're filming. Only film, the technology changes, and it doesn't. It's not snooty about the changing technology. It's not a film that sort of looks back. It's not one of these sort of self-analytical films that says, "Oh, everything was much better when it was on celluloid." And it starts off in silence with some black and white imagery, but it shows that film captures something, whether it's digital film, whether it's motion, like literally when he goes into a motion capture studio in the little like ping pong ball suit and. and there's guns and there's sex and all sorts of stuff going on. But film is about something. But also, it's a real testament to the idea of performance and the idea of direction of a film. And the central character of Mr. Oscar is just, I mean, it's an incredible performance. It's a real, to me, it felt like when I was watching The Raid, it seemed like, and of course he's not filming it all in one go, but it seems like a feat of endurance almost, that performance. And the one film it made me think about was Cabin in the Woods, which we spoke about a couple of weeks ago, which was all very meta and it kind of dissected the genre. But what this film did that Cabin in the Woods didn't do is this film never disappears into itself. And it's... Oh God! I mean, if you listen to a description of this film, it sounds like the most pretentious, terrible thing, but it's not, because it's fun and because it always entertains. Whether that's entertaining you, like making your emotions go in the sort of more sort of poignant scenes, or whether that's kind of the visceral entertainment of the kind of the monster man biting fingers off people and rampaging around and stuff. It's a film that is about something without constantly saying, "Hey, do you see what? Do you get it? Do you get it?"
And it
doesn't care that you don't get it. And I'm not sort of claiming to say this is what this film is about in any way. And it's a film that, like, I mean, we sort of mentioned Prometheus, and you were saying about Looper. It's a film I really want to watch it again.
Yeah.
Because I want to just delve into all the little scenes. I want to try and figure out this kind of this Rubik's Cube of what it is, but it's one of those films that it does all of that highfalutin stuff. On the one hand, it is kind of the worst sort of side of art house cinema in some ways. It's a French film. It's about stuff. It's so strikingly anti-film in some ways. It's so strikingly saying, "Come on then, come on," that you think it's got to be pretentious, but it's just not. It's just enjoyable, and I hope it finds a wide audience. And it's one of the first things I've seen this year where I thought, I want to watch it again. I know Cine Guernsey are going to be showing it, so I'm going to go alongside.
Showing it next year.
I really want to see that film with an audience.
Yeah.
I really want to see that film on Blu-ray as well, because I think it looks
beautiful.
stunning. I mean, what do you think of the, sort of just moving on from the films then, what do you think of the on-demand service that Curzon
I think
has got?
it is fantastic. I mean, because I remember, I think we sat, getting ready for a podcast a good few weeks ago now, and we all kind of, have you seen, the reviews for this Berberian sound studio that's been coming out? Oh, it's a shame. I don't think we're going to get that in Guernsey. Then it was a week later, like, hang on a second, not only is it just come out in the cinema, but if you want to pay £10, which, let's face it, is relatively nothing as far as, paying for a cinema ticket goes, you can watch it now. It's just been released. The same with Holy Motors. This is in the cinema now, and you can pay to see it. Really great quality. Yes.
And I think it shows people will watch stuff legitimately.
Well, I think it does.
If they can.
Yeah, I'm hoping it becomes a big success because, it's a great service. They've got a whole library of films on there as well. It's not just new releases. They've got a lot of other stuff on there that if you want to go back through their back catalogue and have a look at, it's all there. And it's only the new releases that are £9-10. Some of it's included, some of it's £4, some of it's £5. So, there's great. There's a whole wealth of film there. I'm glad you mentioned it because I wrote in my notes as well. We must mention and push the Curzon on demand service because it is really great. It's brilliant. And if anyone here wants to watch a bit more of that cinema, and haven't got time to go and see Cine Guernsey screenings or get to Sarnia Shorts, it was on a few weeks ago, then here's another outlet where we can kind of get hold of and consume that film. And like I say, here's 2 films in the space of 2 weeks that we've seen that we wouldn't get a chance to see until another 6 to 8 months maybe before they get brought out on DVD. And they're both excellent. So yeah, it's great.
Okay, so now we just reached the sort of the wrapping up bit of the show where we say what else have we been watching. I'm going to very quickly mention a couple of things. Being involved in Sarnia Shorts quite extensively, I got to see Full Staff, Orson Welles' Chimes at Midnight on the big screen, and I thought it was ace. I mean, did it fit the event? We've had some discussion about that, but as a film, I think it's fantastic. What I always forget about Chimes at Midnight is just how much the camera moves. It's like watching a Kurosawa movie in some respects, and not just because there's this huge battle that occurs halfway through it. That is just immense, and is just brutal and properly brutal, and goes on, but in a good way. It goes on to the point where you feel as beaten as the people who are sort of. It's a bit like Henry V, the Brannan's Henry V. But I mean, I love it. Full Staff is the role that Wells was born to play, and it was a real treat to see it on the big screen. it's now available on DVD, and it's been restored, so it's in widescreen. It's no longer kind of crappy YouTube quality, obscure Argentine DVD that you have to import. It's not even a tenner to buy. I also watched or tried to watch The Dictator, the Sacha Baron Cohen film. I got half an hour in, and I hadn't laughed. I think maybe I'd smirked at one thing.
Did you turn it off?
I turned it off after half an hour. It just couldn't. I kept saying he gets made into a normal man. He has to, he gets. It's the reverse of the Chaplin film, The Dictator, where he's this dictator of a Middle Eastern state who's absolutely awful, and he ends up having to be a normal person in New York and find out how real people live. And the problem is, it's just not funny. It's not funny because it's offensive. I wish it was more offensive. But it would have to be smarter to be more offensive. In his character, there's this thing in it where he's renamed loads of stuff after himself, so everything's Wadja or whatever his name is. So positive and negative both have the same. Both his name is both positive and negative. And there's a guy getting an AIDS test, and you're kind of like, yes, okay, I see where you're going. But the problem there is that was done in Turkmenistan. And Turkmenistan is one of our friends because they're against. So, if the film had the balls to make him an ally of the United States, or it had the balls to make him a really bad man, because there's another joke in there where he's never actually shot anyone. Yeah. He thinks he's shooting people, but the resistance is so. I mean, it's stuff that doesn't make. If the resistance is that embedded, why hasn't he been shot in the face? It's a load of. It's a film. It makes no sense. It's not funny. It's quite witless, and the subject matter. I mean, if you want something funny about fundamentalism, go and look at Four Lines. I mean, I don't think Four Lines is a perfect film, but there are a series of scenes in Four Lines that are just incredible and staggeringly funny because they're insightful.
Oh, for sure.
They actually have something to say about what's going on with these religions. And one final film I watched was The Assassination of a High School President, which is a film that's never been released over here.
Never heard of it.
I think it's about 3 or 4 years old now. It's Bruce Willis is the principal of this high school, and it's all about a reporter called Bobby Funke, not the Arrested Development. Yep. But he's on the high school paper, and he uncovers what he thinks is a rather simple plot about someone stealing the SAT scores. And it brings down the high school president. And someone says, "Are you sure this isn't a coup d'état?" And the film goes from there, and it goes a bit. It's very Chinatown-y. I think what happened was it was released right around the time Brick came out, and Brick is so solid in what it's doing that this film doesn't get a look in, because this film it's a lot lighter than Brick. It's not so committed to the idea of the hard-boiled noir idea. Yeah. But it's a really good journalist story. It's very funny, and it's quite dirty in a way. A lot of kind of 80s comedies used to be dirty as well. I'd recommend it. You can get it on Region B Blu-ray from Australia.
Okay.
But I picked it up off eBay for like a $5. Okay. And it's well worth checking out. But you won't get it in Blockbuster.
Yeah. No, fair enough. I've never heard of it. It sounds exciting. What have I caught? I've caught a couple of extra things. None of them. I think we've talked about both of them previously. I managed to watch Drive again. Finally, I've been meaning to get around to watching Drive again because I only saw it. When it came out on DVD once I think one of the first podcasts we ever did was about Drive. Maybe even the first, I think. And I hadn't seen it. And I bought it on DVD and kind of seen it since and got Blu-ray and then watched it again last week. I enjoyed it so much more the second time round. Really, really enjoyed it. I mean, I loved it the first time, but I thought it was absolutely brilliant, and it looked amazing on Blu-ray. It looked so good. Very happy to watch it again. If you haven't seen it yet, go and see it. If you have seen it, buy it and watch it again.
I can recommend the book as well.
Exactly.
I've read the book, and it's different enough to be enjoyable, kind of aside from the movie. So there's a lot more stuff going on in the book, but it's still as stripped down and kind of shark-like in its view as the film is.
Great, very good. Both. The other thing I managed to catch again, which I caught at a Cine Guernsey screening last year, was 13 Assassins, Takeshi Miike's modern kind of, not modern, but recent samurai epic, kind of classical in many ways. But what it basically ends with is an hour-long kind of siege, another siege movie. It's really strange, talking about another one after we've already talked about, Bond and then The Raid and Judge Dredd and all of these kind of things. But that is excellent. I do love that film as well. I'm quite a big fan of kind of samurai films and Takeshi Miike in particular in general. So yeah, loved that. I mean, it's just the sheer balls of it. Just what it does, it kind of sets it all up very, very quickly and very economically, and then it just unleashes hell and off it goes. And if you like those kind of samurai cliches and everything that comes with it, the sound effects, the way they move, kind of everything, it's a great example of great modern Japanese.
A very
samurai
patient
cinema.
film as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and like I say, it is excellent. So if you haven't seen that as well, pick up a copy of that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for listening to 24 Lives Per Second, Guernsey's only dedicated film and cinema podcast. Please support us by liking us on the Guernsey Film Info page and also our channel on YouTube. Next time round, I'm not sure what we'll be talking about because I haven't.
I'm not sure. To be honest, neither have I. It'll be something good, I'm sure.
Oh, hopefully. Anyway, thanks for listening.